Howdy historians, Mr. Montgomery here, coming to you live from room 112, AP US History, doing a flip lesson today for Imperial Policy and Control. So let's go ahead and hop into it here. Now, just as we get started, remember we are in Unit 2, Part 3, the struggle for power in North America, and what we're looking at today, resistance to imperial control. We're going to put it into a couple different videos. So this first part is going to start with imperial control and talk a lot about economics. The second video will talk about the Glorious Revolution in political systems and some of the seeds of liberty, and then eventually we'll wrap this whole thing up as well. So that's where we are on your lecture outline, which you got in your unit packet. Now, a couple reminders before we get going. There's some vocabulary on your handout that goes along with this flip video. Make sure that you have it defined. You've probably already done it for your key terms and people to know, but define it or review it, either or, but it'll help you know what's going on and comprehend the information better. Take notes as we go through. There is your lecture outline that you got in the unit packet. There's also an outline on your flip video lesson guide. Remember, use the functionality, pause the video, rewind it if you need to. That's the great part about these flip lessons, is you can go at your own pace. And then don't forget to answer the wrap-up questions once you are done watching the video, and jot down any questions that you have that you'd like me to answer or that you'd just like to discuss with the class once we resume. So let's hop right into it here. We're talking about resistance to imperial control as we're on our lecture outline, the struggle for power, and we've talked about growing colonial identity, and now we want to talk about imperial control and mercantilism. Now, to do that, we've got to back up a little bit, and we've got to talk about the triangular trade. Now, you did a primary document exercise about this, but a couple things that we want to revisit as we get ready to think about imperial control and mercantilism. So first, a little review. The triangular trade, this is the trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. The colonists are heavily impacted by this. The American colonies in England, their trade was a major driving force in this triangular trade. But a couple things that we need to understand as we get ready to dive into mercantilism. One, the trade between the American colonists and the English was not balanced. The Americans, the colonists, they produced too many products, too much products. They were producing lots of those raw goods that we talked about: tobacco, rice, indigo, lumber, whale oil. And these things were being produced so much that the English couldn't buy everything that was being produced. So this is causing a trade imbalance. The colonists are going to want to trade with other countries to get rid of their excess materials, their excess products, and because of the policy of mercantilism, they're not going to be allowed to do that. So we've got to understand that there were strains that started to appear in this complex trade network because the American population was growing rapidly and expanding, their production was growing rapidly and expanding, but England's population was not growing as fast, and they just simply couldn't consume everything that the Americans or colonists had to sell. So this English population, these English markets, were being saturated with American and colonial goods so fast that they just couldn't buy it all. They couldn't consume it all. So what's going to happen here is that the colonists are going to start to look for new markets to trade their surplus of exports to, and this is going to cause some tension over imperial control of the colonial economy and cause some tension over the system of mercantilism. Now, that's where we want to go to next, is we want to understand the system of mercantilism. This is something that we've alluded to a couple times during this unit. Now, as we start to talk about mercantilism, let's start with just a basic definition and understanding. The number one idea of mercantilism is that a nation's wealth was defined by exporting more than you import. You always wanted to have increasing gold and silver reserves. So you're always trying to make money. You're always trying to export more than you import, which means sell more than you buy, because you want to increase your wealth. And all this wealth is going to lead to military and economic strength. So in the mercantilist system, as we grab this chart here and take a look at it, we can see a couple things we already know. One, the mother country's treasury wants to be filled with gold and silver. So to do that, you want to have a favorable balance of trade. You want to have few imports and more exports. So you want to sell more than you buy. So the way that this works with the colonies is that the colonies are basically there to be exploited by the mother country so that they can have this favorable trade balance and they can have increasing amounts of gold and silvers in their treasury. So the colonies take raw materials like fur and they sell this to the mother country. Now the colonies are only allowed to sell to the mother country. So the English colonies are only allowed to sell back to England. They're not allowed to work with other countries. The colonies also are not allowed to finish these products. So if we're working with the example of fur, the colonists go out and they trap some beaver. And now they have this fur. They're not allowed to turn it into a beaver skin hat. Instead, they have to take the raw fur and they have to sell it to the mother country. Now, because the mother country is the only one that the colonists are allowed to trade with, the mother country can basically pay whatever they want. There's no competition here. If the colonists were able to sell to the French, the English, and the Dutch, they could sell it to whoever would give them the best price. But since the mother country is the only one allowed to buy it, the colonists don't always get a lot of competition or a fair market price because the mother country wants to be able to turn this raw material into a manufactured or finished product and then sell it back to the colonies at a profit. So the colonists trap a beaver, they turn that beaver into a skin, they sell it to the mother country who buys it for a good price. The mother country or the English turn that beaver skin into a hat and then sell that hat back to the colonies at a larger price than what they bought it for. So they're always making money. They're always selling more than they're buying, and they're increasing the amount of gold and silver in their treasury. Now, as we can see here, the colony's main purpose is to provide these raw goods, these raw materials, so that way England wouldn't have to buy them from another country. They can get them for a good price, and they can increase the economic wealth of the mother country. Did colonists get rich in this system? Of course, but they still felt held back because competition was being removed from the system in mercantilism. So this is something that's going to cause tension and resentment. The colonists weren't allowed to finish products. They were only there to provide the raw materials. Now at different times, sometimes the English really enforced mercantilism, other times they didn't, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but the general idea is that in mercantilism, the colonies are there to be exploited and used by the mother country, so this is going to cause tension and resentment because the colonists are going to feel held back. So they're going to try to get around this, especially since they had more goods than the English could buy. Now the English knew this, the crown knew this, so to try to prevent the colonists from trading with other countries, they passed the Navigation Laws and the Molasses Act. Now let's start with the Navigation Laws. The Navigation Laws are in place. They started in 1651, and they're there to regulate colonial shipping. Basically the idea is, if the colonists are going to buy anything, it has to come from the English. And if the colonists are going to sell anything, they have to sell it to, guess who? The English, the mother country. So all goods destined for the colonies first go through England, and any trade only happens with the English. They're really aiming to try to cut out colonial trade with the Dutch and with the French. The Dutch down in the West Indies, the Caribbean, and the French down in the West Indies as well. So they're trying to reinforce their policy of mercantilism through the Navigation Acts. And this was some important imperial legislation during the colonial period. They're trying to really keep the system of mercantilism in place. But again, the colonists don't like the navigation laws. There was a series of them passed, 1651, 1660, 1663, and 1673. But the colonists felt held back economically. They felt that they were being held in a state of, quote, economic infancy, whereas the British, the English, really saw the colonists as ungrateful children. They thought, listen, we're buying your products at a pretty good price. Everyone's making money off it. You're kind of second class. You're secondary in this policy of mercantilism. So just deal with it. You're getting rich. Stop complaining because you want to get richer. But the colonists felt held back. They felt disrespected, tension was growing, and they felt that money was being taken away from them, and that's never a good thing. That's going to cause a lot of tension and a lot of resentment. The Molasses Act was another one, passed in 1737, where again, they're trying to stop the colonists from trading molasses in the French West Indies. It proved largely ineffective though, because here's the deal. The colonists, they're very far away from the crown. we've learned about the law of proximity. They're able to smuggle their way around it. The Atlantic seaboard is enormous, and the crown, the king, can't send enough officials over to really patrol it and make sure that none of this trade is going on. It's just too hard to do. There's too much geographic space, and the crown and their ministers are too far away. When the ministers are there, the colonists have no problem just bribing them. And again, the ministers, the officials of the government, they're far away from the king, so they're going to take the bribe. They're getting paid, plus they're getting money on the side. And also, there were times where the king and the crown just kind of went through a period of neglect, what we call salutary neglect, beneficial neglect, where they're not enforcing these policies very strictly, and that allowed the colonists to grow in their economic livelihoods and in their trade. So what we see here with mercantilism, the triangular trade, is that the colonists are being feel like they're being held back economically, and eventually what we're going to see here is that the king is going to get strict, and the monarchy is going to get strict, and they're going to try to bring their disobedient children back into line and force them to follow. And they're going to try to force them to follow these rules, these regulations. They're going to try to really enforce mercantilism, and that is not going to work well. And that's going to cause a great deal of tension and eventually be one of the primary causes of the American Revolution. So that's a little bit about imperial control of the economy and mercantilism and the colonial response to it. They get around it as much as they can, but lots of tension a-brewin', resentment a-brewin'. So that's part one. We're going to come back in part two and talk about imperial control of the political system. See you soon. Take some good notes.